Would you also agree that Emma Lazarus's words etched on the Statue of Liberty, "Give me your tired, your poor," are also part of the American ethos?
They certainly are. Give me your tired and your poor who can stand on their own 2 feet and who will not become a public charge.
All right, this week, Ken Cuccinelli, you heard there, the acting head of Citizenship and Immigration Services, misquoted the Statue of Liberty poem while touting the Trump administration's new rule making it harder for low-income legal immigrants who receive food stamps or other forms of public assistance to stay in the United States. In fact, this comes as the federal government is apparently using a new tactic to track and arrest undocumented workers. ICE used GPS data from immigrants' ankle monitors to target raids at food processing plants in Mississippi earlier this month. Joining me now is MSNBC legal analyst Danny Cevallos, Democratic pollster Fernand Amandi, and Nayyera, a former State Department senior advisor. Danny, help us understand what exactly this means. You and I spoke about this a little bit earlier in the week when we were starting to get these reports, but help us understand what it is the federal government, through its agencies, are doing to undocumented immigrants who are coming here with this whole GPS thing.
They're attaching GPS ankle bracelets, which are commonly used in the context of pretrial. When you send somebody out and you don't hold them in custody, it allows the government to track where that person is, especially if you have concerns about that person showing up for court. It's also used on the other end for parolees, folks who get out of prison, and it saves the government a lot of money. Instead of housing people so you know where they are, you can use a GPS, you can use advancing technology increasingly, and I've seen it myself. You can tell the difference between someone being in their living room and on their front porch with GPS technology today. So that helps the government monitor where folks are. The key is, are they using it to make sure they show up for court, or are they using it to build evidence in new criminal cases? And courts, including the Supreme Court, have treated those differently.
Okay, so put on your lawyer hat for me for a second and tell me, what is the concern that lawyers like yourself, human rights organizations or civil advocacy groups might have about this tactic?
Because there's a huge concern, because it's one thing to track the movements of folks who are accused of a crime. In the case of asylum seekers who have committed no crime, the installation of an ankle monitor actually creates two searches under the Fourth Amendment. The first is actually putting it on your ankle, but the second, and Justice Alito and Justice Breyer and Sotomayor have observed this, that the continuing monitoring is a search under the Fourth Amendment, and it has to be really scrutinized if you're going to conduct a search like that without probable cause and for ongoing law enforcement investigative purposes. The courts haven't really dealt with the issue of asylum seekers and ankle monitors, but if you apply what the courts have said about pretrial detainees or those charged with a crime or parolees, then there's an even stronger case that this is an unconstitutional search.
And so to that point, Fernand, let me share with you this from California, according to the Washington Post here. They're essentially saying that California, the state with the largest population of immigrants, filed a federal lawsuit Friday, hoping to derail the Trump administration's attempt to deny green cards and visa extensions to foreign nationals who use Medicaid, food stamps, or other public assistance. In reference back to that soundbite we played from Ken Cuccinelli and the defense that he has made that this was on the books through the public charge law. What do you make of the administration's attempt to try and deny those who are in this country legally a path forward to citizenship and even staying here if they're relying on government assistance?
Ayman, let's call it what it is. These are not good faith immigration policies that are being done to tackle an issue of national concern or crises. This is a white supremacist domestic terror campaign that is targeting people of color in the United States under the name of the United States government, where the casualties are now children and families. It is shameful, it is unacceptable, and it is un-American. And more importantly, Ayman, from the perspective of public opinion, this is not at all what the American people want. If you look at survey after survey, poll after poll, that's the trade that I work in, these are deeply unpopular positions. Very few Americans support this approach, and I think we're seeing the consequences as we have a more radicalized, overheated rhetoric all throughout the United States that is now resulting in the loss of life by these xenophobic, nativist Americans that are taking this to an extreme.
Let me play for you guys Julian Castro, speaking to my colleague Chris Hayes on All In. This is what he had to say about the president's new policies.
I think the point that needs to be asked is, why is Donald Trump so interested in cutting off this generation of immigrants? And it goes back to what he's displayed from the beginning of his political career, from birtherism to the way he started his campaign, to those comments about the Mexican-American judge, to his comments about Ilhan Omar and her colleagues. He wants a whiter, wealthier nation.
Nayyera, put this in perspective for us, the way that the presidential candidate there, Julian Castro, has said. Is this part of a larger, broader policy by this Trump administration that fits that narrative, you think?
Absolutely. Listen, look at who actually really reacts and cares about undocumented immigrants and their welfare and safety, and who are the people who start foaming at the mouth when we start talking about illegals. People along the border, those communities are actually not the ones who are talking about building a wall. In fact, Congressman Bill Hurd said he can no longer run for Congress as a Republican because his community is so integrated and diverse, and they're not interested in these hard-line tactics. This is a rhetoric that plays to fears and racial anxieties in the Midwest, in places where, frankly, people don't have to interact with undocumented people or people of color very much. And now it's at the point where the Trump administration is saying that silent part out loud. Ken Cuccinelli, in an interview earlier this week, actually said, oh, well, the Statue of Liberty was about European immigration. Well, the fact is, Emma Lazarus was a Jewish refugee from Brazil. So she, under Ken Cuccinelli, the woman who wrote that poem, would not have qualified to come into the United States, and they're very okay with that. They are being far more overt and far more direct about calling people illegal and using these terms of legality to figure out how they can change the demographic makeup of the United States.
You wanted to jump in on that real quick.
Well, here's the challenge,
right.
And I understand people's concerns, especially Fernand's, but the public charge rule has been around since 1882. It's been statutorily completely unchanged since 1996. The idea has been for well over 100 years that we don't want folks to come here if they're completely reliant on government assistance. So I guess my question...
That's where it gets confusing to people,
right.
And I think it's a very easy way to say public charge means you're entirely dependent on government. When you look at, say, income inequality, and you know that the Walmart family is making $4 million an hour, but Walmart associates are making $11 an hour. That is working poor. Those might be people who have children who are U.S. citizens who need that extra hand up to get by. So it's the demonization of people who are poor, who are working, and
Nayyera,
assuming
hold on
that they're public charge.
I want to give Danny a chance to finish his thought. Go ahead.
Nayyera, I totally respect what you're saying, but the public charge rule is not about targeting the poor. It's about focusing on self-sufficiency. One can be poor and self-sufficient. So I guess my question to you, Nayyera, is what about this change to the public charge rule makes it improper now, whereas all those hundreds of years before, when we had the public charge rule under both Democratic and Republican administrations, it was acceptable?
It's all about interpretation, right? Like, you're a lawyer, I've worked in government, and administrative law ends up being heavily based on discretion. So when you have the administration talking about how they need to be cutting off supplemental nutrition benefits for families in general, it's the interpretation of how you look at this and putting out rules that now, if you even apply as a family, that is a problem, because now you're affecting citizens and children who are here and have paid taxes into getting those benefits.
All right. Sorry, Fernand, go ahead. Last word to you.
Just quickly, I mean, Nayyera is right on the money. I mean, this is idea of selective enforcement of legal precedent. You know, we're not talking again about a good faith administration trying to tackle a problem. This is a regime that is shown over and over again. They are wearing their racism on their sleeve. And I speak to Danny's point. I mean, look, I'm coming to this conversation from Miami. My entire family, Cuban Americans that came in the 50s, 60s, 70s to the present day, they started off reliant on government services in order to be able to make a contribution to this country. In the process, that wave of immigrants and refugees and exiles transformed and made Miami one of the world-class cities. That phenomenon is happening all over the country. So to pretend that there's a legal concern here is ridiculous.
Let me leave you guys with this just final thought, and we got to wrap this up. It's statistically been proven, economically been proven, that the first generation of immigrants who do come into this country, even if they do receive assistance, their offspring, their descendants have accelerated and have contributed much more to the economy of this country beyond that first generation. We should not ever lose sight of that. Danny Cevallos, Fernand Amandi, thank you very much to both of you. Nayyera, you're going to be back with us a little bit later on in the program.